Mr. Darcy's Christmas Wish, a Pride and Prejudice Variation, written by Lysa Shimkus. Chapter 1, November 29th, 1812. What do you suppose my aunt wishes to speak to us about? Colonel Richard Fitzwilliam shuffled a deck of cards in his hands as he spoke from his spot by the fire. There is no us, for it is I whom Lady Catherine de Bourgh has summoned. Fitzwilliam Darcy stared out the window, overseeing the gardens below, his chest tight and his nerves on edge. He despised surprises and would have liked more detail on why Lady Catherine de Bourgh had summoned him. He also detested spontaneity, which was how he received her invitation that morning. His ride to Rosings Park was less than enjoyable, and he hoped to have been sent away within an hour or two. However, he was invited to dine, then to play cards, and now to wait in the drawing room for the women. The door to the room opened, and the older lady strolled into the room, followed by her pale and fragile daughter. The former's eyes grew round at the sight of both gentlemen in the drawing room. "Richard, whatever are you in here for?" she asked, her eyes on the gentleman by the fire. The colonel straightened. "I have come to see if my cousin would be in need of any assistance." "Assistance he does not, although my dear Anne is growing weary. See to it she makes it to her room, will you?" "Yes, ma'am." This left Darcy to stand before the window as his aunt slowly made her way to the settee by the fire. Both of the cousins exited the room and closed the door behind them. "Do come sit down, Fitzwilliam," Lady Catherine de Bourgh instructed. "If you do not mind, madam, I prefer to stand." In truth, Darcy was afraid to sit by his aunt. Her demeanor was always cold and stiff, and should one be near the woman, one would surely turn into a block of ice alongside her. Very well. The older woman sat herself down and fixed the wrinkles of her dark violet dress. There was a long silence before the woman spoke again. "I suppose you have guessed the reason I have asked you here?" "I'm afraid not, dear aunt. I do not know the nature of your needing my presence this evening." "It's about your duty." Darcy fought the urge to look skyward. This nonsensical talk once more. "Before your father died, I swore to him I would see you happily married." Darcy waited for her to say, "to my daughter," but the older woman did not. Did she imply it, though? "Pemberley is such a gorgeous house, and it needs a mistress to see to it." Darcy wished to ask why his sister Georgiana could not play hostess until Darcy felt ready to marry. He'd had the conversation with his aunt many times over, and he knew there was no changing the woman's mind. In addition, his sister was extremely shy. It's possible the young lady would lock herself in her room all day, then give orders to the staff. "Mrs. Reynolds makes a grand housekeeper at Pemberley," Darcy assured his aunt, his eyes still on the gardens. "And my work has kept me away from finding a suitable match." He could think of many reasons as to why he was still a bachelor, the most important being that Darcy did not wish to marry and take on marital responsibilities just yet. "Nonsense! You have dined with many families, I hear. And what about Hertfordshire? Do not you visit there often?" Hertfordshire was home to Netherfield Park, where Darcy's friend Charles Bingley resided when not in the city. The country had few neighbors. Darcy could name only 2 maidens whom he considered handsome. The older woman continued, "Darcy, you are nearing 30, and it's time you settled down. I cannot keep holding on to this promise I have made to your father. The sooner you wed, the sooner I can rest at ease, knowing I have fulfilled your father's wishes." He could not understand how this burden fell upon his aunt, for Darcy was not in need of a guardian any longer. He was also not yet 30, only 8 and 20. However, he knew his aunt had his best interest at heart, if not so she could boast about her part in his marriage. He just wished she'd cease throwing her daughter at him as a prospect. Anne had the misfortune of having been born with a weak heart. This left her pale and weak all her life. Her daily activities included reclining in a chair, playing lightly at the piano, and being read to. Darcy himself preferred a more active lifestyle, with riding to fencing to working. He could not see himself locked up in a room all day, all to entertain an ailing wife. He much preferred an equal. Tonight, Lady Catherine did not mention her daughter once. Had she finally respected Darcy's wish not to marry his own cousin? "What about that Miss Caroline Bingley?" Lady Catherine de Bourgh inquired. "She is rather beautiful." Darcy smirked to himself. Beauty was all Caroline possessed. Again, Darcy could not see himself as husband to this particular young woman, one whose only hobbies included cards and gossip. "Miss Bingley is a good friend, but I am afraid that is all she serves." There was silence once again, but the tension in the drawing-room told Darcy his aunt still had a lot to say on the subject matter. He was correct when she sighed and said, "I suppose if you were to object to your duty, then I must withhold the master classes on the piano from dear Georgiana." Darcy had braced himself for some form of manipulation, but he was caught off guard by the use of his sister. Bringing her into the mix only poured salt upon injury. True, Georgiana loved the piano. She had been wanting to better her skills, and knowing that Lady Catherine de Bourgh hired a master to teach her daughter, Darcy inquired if the master could teach his sister as well. Lady Catherine was all too willing to pay for both girls' lessons, but now she was using it as blackmail. Darcy didn't know how to respond. Should he retaliate, the older woman would have something clever or nasty to say. If he were to have Georgiana withdrawn from the master classes, his sister would be mortified. Darcy didn't want to disappoint his beloved sister. "At least by Christmas?" the older woman pleaded. "I beg your pardon?" Darcy finally looked over at his aunt and could see sincerity on the woman's usually stern face. "At least find a match by Christmas. Cannot you make releasing me of this burden a gift to an old woman?" A gift. Lady Catherine de Bourgh made this sound easy. Christmas was a month away. How was Darcy to find a betrothed in such a short period of time? He did not have his cousin Richard's charm, nor his friend Bingley's amiability. He especially did not have a knack for falsehood like George Wickham to deceive his way into a woman's heart. However, the sooner Darcy fulfilled the task, the sooner he'd cease hearing from the woman about his duty. He tired of the subject since she first pressed him to marry 5 years ago. But he needed to be sure things went his way, and that Lady Catherine de Bourgh could not manipulate the circumstances nor blackmail him any further. "I will agree to this under 2 conditions." Lady Catherine stiffened, but said, "Name them." "That you will not interfere with my courtship to any lady I choose, and you will allow Georgiana to practice the piano until Christmas." The older woman nodded her head, though her shoulders were still tense. Darcy was surprised his aunt did not attack his words nor assert herself. Either the woman had also grown weary of the subject, which he highly doubted, or she had a glass of brandy before entering the room. The latter seemed more likely. Very well. Lady Catherine relaxed and sat back with a small smile on her face. His aunt still considered this a win on her part. Fighting back an irritated scowl, Darcy gazed back out the window. How was he to find a lady worth courting in a month's time? Chapter 2. It is a truth universally acknowledged that should one close their eyes for another moment, one is bound to rise late for church. Such an event occurred to Miss Elizabeth Bennet on this Sunday morning. Lizzie, as she preferred to be acknowledged by, was soon scurrying off toward the direction of the village church, tying her bonnet strings under her chin and muttering how she was going to have a chat with Jane as she wrapped her shawl more tightly around herself. She arrived at the parish just as her family stood outside its doors, greeting the pastor. Elizabeth slowed her steps so as to join them in a calming state. "Lizzie, where have you been?" their mother spoke over her shoulders. "Pardon my absence, Mamma, for I was preoccupied with a missive from Charlotte Lucas." Elizabeth told a falsehood she hoped no one would discover. Charlotte Lucas was not only their neighbor, but Lizzie's best friend. "Oh, that Miss Lucas! Could she not wait until we break our fast to send a correspondence?" Lizzie needed not reply, as the Bennets were soon ushered into the pews. The pastor's sermon on this first Sunday of Advent made Lizzie wish she were back in the warmth and comfort of her bed. She'd heard the sermon for as long as she could remember. However, being the second eldest of 5 daughters, she needed to be a better example to her sisters. Sisters whom, she noticed in that moment, were idling in one way or another. Mary was struggling to keep her eyes open, while Lydia and Kitty whispered and giggled among themselves. Only Jane, the eldest, listened intently alongside their parents. Jane was always the better example, and Lizzie was grateful for her. After service, the Bennets returned to the cool and cloudy outdoors, where Mamma strayed to gossip with the neighbors, Papa spoke to the pastor about Advent, and Lizzie's 3 youngest sisters sought out friendly faces. Lizzie took this opportunity to speak to Jane, whom she pulled to the side. Jane was the most handsome of the Bennet sisters. She was also sweet, docile, and amiable, which was why Lizzie couldn't understand. "My dearest Jane, how is it you did not rouse me this morning?" Jane shot her big, round blue eyes. "I did, sister, but it was you who sent me away. Do you not remember? You said you were not to accompany us this morning." Lizzie could only recall rising late. "Thankfully, Mamma only took notice of your absence once we arrived," Jane continued. "I'm terribly sorry, sister. I shall not heed your request come Sunday next." A smile broke upon Lizzie's face. How could she remain vexed while her sister was all too innocent? "The fault is all mine. I should have known I gave you orders whilst drowsy." It was in that precise moment that Papa joined them. "Come, my girls, I think it is time we break our fast. Your mother can join us when she grows hungry." At the breakfast table, in which the family enjoyed cold cuts, bread, butter, and chocolate, Lydia exclaimed, "What are we to wear to Netherfield Park?" Lizzie smiled over at Jane, who blushed instantly. Netherfield Park was currently on lease to Mr. Charles Bingley, Jane's betrothed. They'd been engaged as of Michaelmas. The Bennets had been invited to dine that evening. "Lydia, my dear, we will go to Meryton to gather new things," Mamma replied, "and should you not find what you need, you may borrow from Kitty." Lydia was the second youngest and their mother's favorite. Kitty, on the contrary, always did second best. When Kitty objected, there was an uproar of conversation, and Lizzie could only comment on how lucky Jane was to soon be away from their family drama. The eldest would be mistress to a big house, and the only individuals she would have to worry about were Bingley's 2 sisters. Even then, she could avoid the gossip-hungry women by disappearing to her duties. Lizzie envied her sister, in a good, gentle manner. She envied Jane's good nature, her beauty, and her future. However, should any lady be worthy of such a good man as Bingley, it would have to be Jane. The 2 were a match made in heaven. "It is such a good thing Bingley's returned to Hertfordshire," Lydia remarked. "I wonder if Mr. Darcy will be there as well," Kitty added. Lizzie winced at the name. Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy was Charles Bingley's best friend. The 2 were inseparable and also influential of the other. Before Bingley's return, Lizzie had learned that Darcy had been involved in his absence, convincing his friend to return to London for a long period in hopes that Bingley would forget about Jane. Lizzie never forgave the man for interfering with her sister's love life. She detested the man not only for poking his nose where it shouldn't be, but for insulting her at the Meryton ball when they first met. He had deemed her unattractive for his tastes. His words had wounded Lizzie. Although the latter did not acquire blonde hair and blue eyes like Jane, but rather brown and brown, she still considered herself pretty attractive. Darcy's words, however, cut into her insecurities. For if a man as handsome as Darcy, though lacking in good nature, did not see her as worthy, who would? "Come now, girls, we have a lot to do." Mamma's words cut into Lizzie's thoughts. Their mother soon had the table cleared, and every Bennet woman was on her way to Meryton. Upon arriving at the High Street, Mamma and the youngest 3 girls disappeared into a shop to buy lace, ribbons, feathers, and the latest fashion. As for the older 2, they made for the bookshop. Within were only 2 other customers, a gentleman by the register and an elderly woman. Lizzie adored books. They were her greatest companions. True, Papa had a large array of books in his study, but they held only the classics. Lizzie wanted to browse the latest bestsellers. It was not long before Jane joined her side, with the older woman near to her other side. "Excuse my prying," Jane said. "I couldn't help but notice your reaction at the breakfast table." Lizzie closed her book. "What do you mean?" "When Mr. Darcy's name was mentioned." Lizzie held a laugh. "Oh, Jane, do not let my sores bother you. I have yet to forgive his behavior of late." Cannot you let bygones be bygones? I cannot marry a man whose best friend is despised by my sister." Lizzie searched her sister's face for a teasing gesture, but found none. Jane was serious. "Did I hear you say you have troubles with your beau?" The older woman closed the gap on Lizzie's other side, and Lizzie nearly blushed. Mr. Darcy was not her beau. "It is easy to be blinded by our pain and stubbornness," the woman continued. "However, should we allow a wall to be built, those dearest to us may be a loss forever." Lizzie was speechless. She wanted to thank the woman for her words, but the latter was not yet done. "Take myself as an example. When I was still young and beautiful, a young neighboring boy fell in love with me. He was charming indeed. However, he had spoken some rather truthful yet hurtful words, and I never forgave him. He then attended university, and I never saw him again." The woman's eyes seemed to trail off into the distance. "Thank you for your words of wisdom," Lizzie replied. The woman nodded to the sisters and returned to her own browsing. Jane, however, had been eyeing Lizzie with an arched eyebrow. Upon realizing the eldest would not let the matter rest until Lizzie had a response, the latter sighed and replied, "I will behave if Mr. Darcy behaves." The sisters exited the bookstore, arm in arm, with no new novel to devour. However, Jane was more cheerful and light-hearted, and Lizzie more distressed. She had been considering the older woman's words. Could Lizzie truly lose the love and attention of her sister if she continued to remain stubborn toward Mr. Darcy? She squeezed her sister's arm more tightly. For the sake of Jane, Lizzie would try to be more civil toward her future brother-in-law's best friend. Thank you so much for listening to this excerpt of Mr. Darcy's Christmas Wish, a Pride and Prejudice variation. To find the full novelette, see the description box below. Mr. Darcy's Christmas Wish can be found in paperback form as well as ebook. As for an audiobook, that will be a future endeavor, as I am currently working on the next book in this series. Please subscribe to this channel so that you are aware of the next book when it becomes available. Again, thank you for listening. Have a lovely day.